All right. So again, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see all of you make it here. We've got a pretty full agenda for today. As you can go ahead and see, there's a bunch of stuff on the agenda today. So it's a good way to kind of kick off the year. Allow lots of updates from everybody. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And Trey, I'll toss it over to you to go ahead and kick off the TC updates and the like.
If you missed the news, yesterday, STIX and Taxi 2.1 won the OASIS Open Cup. This is awarded each year. I don't know if it's awarded every year, but when it is awarded, it's awarded to an OASIS standard that's achieved full OASIS standard status, a standard, as it were. And there were several other contenders that were quite worthy competition, but we won. So yay, all of y'all, yay us. I guess you could put this on your LinkedIn or something if you wanted to. Hey, is that Brett Jordan? No, is that a different? No. Oh, sorry, that's a different Brett. Sorry.
That's Brett from Radical.
Okay. Anyway, that's it on this point, but 3 cheers.
Now, everyone,
Rob, do you want to add anything on that?
No, this is what the only thing I would add to this is as Rich Struess used to go ahead and say many times, and I have shamelessly adopted this is this is your TC, and this represents your work, and so this is no one individual's recognition. This is a group recognition for everything that we've done to be able to go ahead and get the STIX and taxi standards to this point that they are today. So huge kudos to all of you for everything that you've done. We know that this is a labor of love, a volunteer position, and we know this is also greatly needed in our community. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Next slide. Okay, so COVID is just like going on so long. I've reorganized my sock drawer 50 million times. So I started in on my photos and I found this, and I don't see, is Rich here? He's probably not. In case you don't know, Rich is off doing a cool startup, but this is where I met Rich. And there are some familiar faces in here for those of you who've been around a long time. You can see, is there like a laser pointer thing here? So that's Rich, thank you. And then there's Ivan, I think, and Mark Davidson. Mark Davidson's in like kind of a pink polo on the left. And anyway, I just thought this was fun. This was like right when, oh wait, there's what's his name? I'm drawing a blank from Circle, way over there in the back. Anyway, some familiar faces there. We're all looking considerably. Yep, there's Christoph, yep. So anyway, I just thought that was fun for some of you. I threw that in there. Oh, there's Aaron Kaplan in the back. Yeah, Ralph, yeah. Anyway, that's my diversion, back on track. It felt like, when I was preparing, I had to make some remarks or be prepared to make some remarks at the awards ceremony. When I came across this, I just thought it was worth sharing because this was way before Tampa. This was way before OASIS. This was back when it was still a community, just like living on some MITRE hosted. Hey, Pat, you'll recognize people. Hey, Pat. Hey, did you hear we won that award? You're muted. All right, well, anyway. Enough on that. We got a full agenda. Let's move on.
Sorry, I had my mute on. Yeah, good news. Congratulations, everybody. Especially you guys that did the heavy lifting when heavy hole digging with your shovels. The editors, etc. So, congratulations.
Yeah. There's absolutely lots of people. It's just so many dimensions that if we start mentioning names, we're going to go ahead and forget somebody, then we'd feel bad. So, I mean, this was a absolutely huge, global team effort. Another award yesterday says, I know, Duncan Sparrow, who's on our TC, and he joins our calls from time to time. He got a distinguished contributor award yesterday as well. So, it's a wonderful thing to go ahead and see. This is, as one of the largest TCs within OASIS to go ahead and get the recognition and for the work that we've done. Having said that, back to the day business, we want to go ahead and continue.
We're not done working.
We're not done.
Damn it.
So we've got some announcements to go ahead and make today, but we still need people to go ahead and fill in some roles. We've been talking about this for a few months. Marlon could definitely use some help with that, Interop, as we go through, especially as we're going through Plugfest. So it's some of the names there. We need to basically reinvigorate the taxi piece. Marlon has been filling in to a certain extent as we've been working through Interop. But as we look to go ahead and iterate on taxi, we'll need some co-chairs there. Rich Piazza would like some help as a specification editor, along with Trey and some of the others who have been working on those editor pieces. And we also need maintainers for the open repositories on GitHub. So please reach out to Chris Link directly if you have interest in doing those things. Otherwise, feel free to go ahead and reach out to myself, to Trey. We're all here to go ahead and help answer any questions you might have. None of us bite. We are all in security, so the sarcasm is strong with all of us. But having said that, this is a great group of people to go ahead and work with. And
Weekend has memes. Weekend has memes. Come help us.
The other thing I want to go ahead and go before we actually go into some, the subcommittee updates, is that we've been talking about kind of the futures of the TC and the like. There's and we've alluded to some things happening behind the scenes. We know that on the OASIS front, there are some significant technology projects in progress that we're working on to help us maintain not only the stability of the infrastructure, but also the continuity of things that as people come in and out of the TC, new members come in, people roll off and the like. So there's a bunch of stuff happening there. It's a bit premature to talk about all the details yet, but there is some stuff happening here. One of the things that we did as a TC leadership is we decided to continue the monthly meetings for at least the first quarter of this year. So we'll have this, and we'll also continue a monthly meeting for both February and March, primarily because we want to make sure we keep you guys in the loop on what's going on, as well as we are working on the Interop documents leading up to Plugfest. We wanted to have the opportunity to have as much membership input and visibility into those processes as we can. And then starting in, with March.
And there's one other major agenda topic that you forgot, Rob, which is as we move toward, starting in March, sorry to steal your thunder, as we move toward that quarterly cadence that we're talking about, that's a time when we can reevaluate our meeting times to see if we could provide potentially better global coverage of our community, doing maybe a survey or some kind of thing. If we're doing, for us as TC leadership, to do 2 calls, well, I get a pass because the second call is at 3 a.m. my time. But to do 2 calls a month is a lot. But if we're doing 1 TC call a quarter and everything else is happening on Slack or in working groups and whatnot, then we could potentially add a 3rd slot. So we want to have time to have that conversation around, we've been doing certain things at certain times historically. Does that still make sense for us?
Yeah, so we'll be sending out a doodle poll or something of that nature to go ahead and kind of gauge interest in what those meeting times. At a minimum, I think this 11 a.m. Eastern time for the meetings will probably push that ahead by an hour or 2, so it's a better time for our European colleagues, and reevaluate things, for our West Coast U.S. folks, to the evening meetings and stuff like that. So we've got a number of things to work out. As we were kind of chatting before we started the meeting, scheduling global things is always a difficult challenge, and in the best of times. And so we want to make sure that we're being responsive to you as members, as well as making sure that we're giving everyone the ability to have a proper work-life balance as well. So that's always a huge challenge. So with that, let's go ahead and move over into the subcommittee updates. We'll start off with STIX, and I will hand off to Emily.
All right, thank you, Rob. And if you read that previous chart carefully, you'll notice that Rob did not call for STIX co-chair, and that is because we have a volunteer, and I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming Christian Studer as our new STIX working group co-chair. Thank you so much for stepping forward and helping out with this. So I couldn't be happier. It's really wonderful. And we'll hear more about Christian in a moment. The subcommittee work that has been going on this month has been mostly focused around the extension policy definition, and that's been led by Rich Piazza, and we'll hear more from Rich about that work. It's nearing completion, and we would love to have all of you read the document and provide comments and input at this point. We'll also hear an update from Jeff Mates, who's been leading the incident mini group. And then we will be turning our focus now to JSON signing and some of the other items on the wish list, with John Mark and C. Boyd starting that off next week. And so if that is a topic that interests you, I would invite you to join in next week and start working with us on that topic. So next slide, Rob. And so Trey, I think you wanted to introduce Christian.
Yes, thank you, Emily. So Christian, I mean, I'm not going to read this slide at you. You can read it now or later on if you want to. He presented on our community development corner last month, but he's been around this community for many years, as have Alexander Delanoy and Andras, I see. And I see more of our European folks. Hey, Okan. I guess you're more often. Anyway, so he's one of the Circle folks, the gang that bring you such tools as MISP and so forth. And they do a lot of great work. He's been running point on their STIX taxi implementation now for the past couple of years. And I'm not sure I know anybody who's put as many hours of development time that I can name personally, except for maybe a few MITRE folks on STIX and taxi. So with that, Christian, he's a great guy, and we're lucky. We're lucky that he's stepped up to help out with Emily and help us drive this forward. You want to say something, Christian?
Hey, thanks for this nice introduction. This is a new experience for me, but I'm pretty confident we can just work together and make it work. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to contributing to this community. And thank you for welcoming me and for the very nice presentation of me. Yeah, thanks.
Super, glad to have you. So with that, shall we move on? Emily, back to you, or
all right,
do you have anything to add on this?
Just welcome again. Thanks for volunteering, and thanks for doing the introduction, Trey. I think next up we have Rich. Rob, let's see the next slide. Is going to talk to us about the extensions work that we've been doing. Rich, are you there?
I'm here. So we've been having this working group for, we've met a few times, and this is sort of presenting what we came up with. Once again, nothing's written in stone here. This is just the working group's musings, and so we look forward to more input from the general TC. So as we all know, an extension definition is a way to include content that's not defined in the STIX current specification, things that we might need in the short term, things that we might want to have in the next version of the STIX specification. So what is an extension definition? So this is the formal extension. This is the formal definition of the extension definition. So it has four things. If you want a complete extension definition, it has the JSON schema, which defines the syntax and semantics of the extension definition. It has the extension definition object as defined in the section 7.3 of the spec. It has documentation that's of the style of the STIX specification, and it has examples of the extension definition in use that have been validated with the JSON schema. Next slide. So if we have these extensions and we want to make them available, the question is how can we do that? And recently, with support from DHS, we set up a common repository for STIX common objects, things like locations and CVE vulnerabilities, things like that. That there's no reason for people to reinvent. They can just use this, use the objects in the common repository by specifying the identifier, as opposed to creating their own object and having millions of objects that represent the United States, for instance. So the idea is we would store all those four parts of the execution definition in the common repository. So that's the idea. It would be nice if that was fronted by some taxi server, so it would be easy to access. But once again, that's, a lot of these things are open to discussion. Next slide. So we kind of thought that there would be three paths to developing an extension definition. So the first one we're calling ad hoc, and this is something that is maybe you just want to share with your trust group. It's very informal. It doesn't have to adhere per se to those four parts of the extension definition that I mentioned earlier. It's sort of the way out for people who don't want to get involved with a formal process of the extension definition and don't necessarily want to share it very openly. But we want to make it clear that creating your own extension definition and using it for your own purposes is certainly something that is allowed. The next level is what we're calling externally visible. These are available on the common repository. They're not necessarily, they could be short-term things. They're not necessarily things that will necessarily become part of a future specification. It's just a common place, a common way to sort of advertise an extension definition that you've come up with. The more formal thing is the future specification candidate. This is something that that the TC has some backing. It has the backing of the TC, and the TC has some formal process on how a workflow or a life cycle to see how this goes. Next slide. So just to go through these in a little bit more detail, the ad hoc, there's no requirements other than what's in the spec for execution definition, and there's no expectation that this is going to be shared externally. So it's, maybe for a trust group or something like that. Next slide. So the externally visible, something to be available on a known repo. Could be the common repo that we just talked about, or it could just be something that's on an organization or personal GitHub site, just something that is easily accessed. It should be as complete as possible according to that definition on the first slide. There will be no vetting by the TC. It's just essentially, here's some stuff that you might be interested in. And it could become a future specification candidate, but it doesn't have to. Next slide. So this is the more formal version of coming up with an extension definition. It's essentially something that the TC approves work on, something that the TC sees value in that may be in a future release. So the first thing, a proposal is made and the TC has to approve. A working group can be formed. It doesn't have to be. For instance, Jeff is running the incident working group. But you could come essentially with a proposal that's fully formed, and maybe it goes right to being looked at by the TC for approval. It must be complete according to the definitions on that first slide. You have to follow the life cycle to get it approved. It has to be available on the common repository, and when it's approved, it will be added to the future specification working document. Next slide. So here's a little sort of a summary of the life cycle. Either it's something that's been externally visible, or it's a brand new proposal. It gets submitted. Some sort of voting goes on by the TC, whether that's a ballot or something less formal, and it gets in the accepting state. At the accepting state, work begins, which is you fork in the common repository and start doing your work and adding things to it. Eventually you get to a point where it's ready to be road tested, and it enters the beta state. At this point, this is open for discussion, but maybe it's merged into the master branch, so it's a lot more visible. Eventually you get to a point where everybody's sort of happy with it, who's on the working group or people who are using it, and it gets approved by the TC in some sort of vote, and it gets incorporated into the specification working document. At any point, people can decide that this is not something that they want to work on, or it's moribund, it's not going anywhere, so it could go into an archive state. Of course, once something is approved, the only way it can go into an archive state is if the TC says so. Next slide. So there's some implementation issues here. So the first thing is, how should we deal with the fact that we have these extension definitions out there and we have a schema? How do we produce and consume content and make sure it's valid? So, that might be something that the TC wants to at least have some opinion about. It might be something that we want to add that functionality to the STIX validator that's in the OASIS open repository that MITRE has been working on. Then the question is, once it's approved, an approved extension, well, it's going to go into the specification. It will probably use the standard syntax that every other object uses or other properties use. But on the other hand, since it was beta for a while, there might be a lot of content out there that's still using the extension syntax. So question is, how do we deal with that? So there's 3 ways here. You can either say either syntax is valid, either syntax is valid for now, but it will be deprecated as soon as the new specification is released, and it'll be marked as deprecated and then be invalid when the new specification is released. Or right off the bat, it's the extension syntax is invalid, and producers and consumers should update to the standard syntax. The interesting thing here is that maybe using top-level property extensions is the way to go for the extensions that are approved by the TC, because it would make this process easier to deal with. Next slide. Just to go over the intellectual property issues, anything that's contributed to the common repository has to be done under the rules and directives set up by the OASIS. The contributor has to sign a CLA. On the other hand, contributing an extension proposal does not change the intellectual property rights of the contributor, which I didn't know. But what it does is it makes it available for use by others under the license agreement. And we haven't decided which license agreement we're using. It might be the Apache one, or it might be BSD3. So that's open for discussion. The whole thing about the extension definition is it allows an inclusion in future versions of the specification, which is why you want to have these licenses. Next slide. So this is the document that the working group has written. We'd love comments, and you know, eventually, once we get to a point where everybody thinks it's in good shape, we can maybe publish it as a OASIS note or something like that. That's it. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks so much, Rich, and thanks for leading this effort and writing the document. Really appreciate all of the effort and thought that you've put into this.
This is critically important. I felt momentarily like trying to rush this because I'm really excited to get to some of the stuff later in the agenda, but like this is the most important thing, getting extensions right. This is like how our gambit on future-proofing the standard and avoiding wasting endless cycles, talking things through in committee, but iterating in code with like real, like the people working on it who are actually solving their own problem collectively and bringing that solved problem back to us for the blessing. Like this is critically important. And Rich, thank you for leading on this because it's arduous, especially when you dig into the IPR stuff.
Yeah, just to go ahead and reiterate what Trey said, this is a hugely important piece for us, going forward. And I can't emphasize enough the IPR element. It is absolutely, it's vitally imperative that anybody who's working on these extensions goes through the CLA process, signs the documents and stuff like that, to make sure that we can go ahead and use this material within the spec if we choose to include it, or if other people are go ahead and use it, especially as we're looking at at potentially cross-centered use cases. So for example, and I think Trey had posted it in the Slack channel this morning. The Cacao group has already started developing an extension around bringing in Cacao documents into STIX.
That's the University of Oslo. It looked like.
Yeah, so there is a lot of activity and people are following this. So getting this right and making sure that we've got the right IPR in play is important. There are a couple quick questions that Rich. One question from Marlon around when the STIX extension working group is meeting, and then a question from Alexander Delaunay about what happens when our content is archived. Can the extension still be used, or is it discarded in new implementation? If you can just take a couple minutes to go ahead and talk about those.
I don't know if we're going to be, well, We meet in the working call, the usual working call on Tuesdays at 3 Eastern Standard Time. That's what we've been meeting. I'm not sure, Emily can comment on this. If I guess once people comment on the document, we'll set up some meetings to meet again and discuss it. But that will be announced on the mailing list. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to the archived question. I think the point of putting stuff in archived is to sort of indicate that it's not going to be part of a future release. But I don't know if that means that you shouldn't use it. Maybe it returns to the sort of more informal, externally visible, but not necessarily something that's going to wind up in the spec.
Okay.
Maybe an additional
So,
question.
so Alex,
Yeah, so
like,
just one question.
I was going to answer it. It's current OASIS rules, and there is a lot of stuff that Rob and I have been working on with the OASIS board and executive staff around the CLA and working group model and stuff. There's stuff that we can't present to you now, but the answer to your question, Alexander, is current OASIS rules. This may be subject to change, but can we take this offline?
Yeah,
Or
sure.
you-
But I was just mentioning it because I know some of the projects that move away from CLA to developer certificate of origin to make contribution easier. So that just was my point. If we want to get more contributions,
Can we schedule a call with you, maybe Rob and I, or
sure.
whoever else wants to join, and we can have a discussion on that, and
For sure.
Rob and I can bring that to the board. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anything else on extensions? Emily?
No, that was it. Next, we were going to invite Jeff to say a few words about the incident extension.
Do
Hey, Jeff.
apologize for sending over as large a slide deck as I did. So I'm going to try to just basically push through this one fairly quickly. So the incident working group has managed to get a heck of a lot done since this basically had started as a formal thing in October. There's been a lot of changes, and as part of that, we have done a pretty good job, I think, of defining a scope that I believe should probably work for most of the TC, where we're basically going to support life cycles for incidents, IOCs and TTPs tied to them, lots of ways to record severity, things that you can hook into automation, ways you can do related incidents, and how you can actually tie into both your plans for courses of action and which ones you've really executed. But it does not provide how you do your time recording against tickets and much more discrete actions, because those were sort of determined to be something that should probably be a separate object. And if anyone has any questions, please yell at me or chat. But if not, next slide. So that's just a brief overview of the timeline for this particular effort. I know as the TC, we've actually tried getting incidents sorted many times before, and it's a challenge. So hopefully we'll actually be able to push through in the coming month or two. So next slide. So as everyone knows, the current incident object is a stub. These are the properties on there. Yes, definitely a recurring incident. So I won't go over this because this is more something that tends to be talked to for folks who don't know STIX. So next slide. And this is where we start getting into the new fields that are actually given by this extension, where are very few required fields. So for the time being, it was basically pulled fully out of scope of maybe that's its own thing if someone wants to, or potentially that could be recorded as an action item. For anyone who's not reading chat, Marlon asked about the time recording. So that, in my mind, might actually work better as an action, where you can basically say this person logged this much time and the like, but that has to be sorted there if that ends up being that. But for the incident itself, the pretty much only two required new fields in this extension are your investigation status, where we have 3 default values for your open vocab, but we switched it from a enum to an open vocab because a lot of people have systems that might be more granular and they want to use that. Then a determination for the incident, where if your investigating is suspected, if you basically are like, this is a garbage, alert that keeps showing up in our system because whatever they're scanning, they found things, but we don't care, you have low value. Then you have false positive because everyone knows their systems aren't always great. Blocked if you went and actually had your system proactively prevent the thing, so good work, yay. Failed attempt when you didn't proactively prevent it, but it just didn't work. Like, you weren't rate limiting, they were trying to guess a password, they literally never did. Oh well, they failed. It's good, but you can be better. And successful attempt where, okay, they actually achieved something. You don't necessarily know it's their full objective, but it's enough that it has some impact or some other thing that you now need to talk about otherwise. Then we have our 2 main timeline fields where we have your attackers and defender activities, where I'll go into those in more detail later. And then detection methods, which is a list of strings, because that's how you found the thing. So now you have an incident that you're talking about. Next slide. So the classic part of impact is always CIA. So we have our confidentiality and integrity impacts, which are both lists of objects, where your key fields end up being a information type and the loss type that's required for confidentiality, or the information type and alteration that's required for integrity. Now, there's a little star next to the information type because if you say none, you do not need to specify the information type. You can, but this is because omitting information does not necessarily mean there's no impact. It's just there's no impact I'm sharing of this type. So this lets you say, yes, there was no confidential impact at all. I'm not going to enumerate anything else, just none for confidentiality or integrity as just a nice shorthand. Now, if you want to get into much more detail, you can start talking about how many records you lost, the record size you lost, and give a narrative on it. Separate from the overall incident narrative, because as anyone who's filled out incident reporting forms, where I've now been going through as many different kinds as I have as I can find for part of this, that's often listed. And for integrity impact, we do also include a optional recoverability for that particular integrity impact in addition to the incident as a whole. Then availability impact ends up being much simpler, where we have a 0 to 100 scale, which in turn has a mapping for it, because time attempts to do enums or open vocabs were determined to be much less clear than just something that you can map to your own system with a 0 to 100 like we do with confidence. Any questions on these items? Okay, excellent. So now we also do have non-CIA impacts, where you have the overall incident recoverability, because that's how long it takes for you to not have it be a problem. Your impacts to traceability for those systems where this is a important concern. So how badly did this incident affect your ability to say that, this is able to basically establish strong forensic traces, strong non-repudiation, and the like. So you must recover that before you can actually potentially be fully operational again. Then external impacts, where because of the nature of these fields, these didn't get a severity level because no one in a SOC wants to basically go like, yeah, this caused like a medium severity civil liberties impact. And a low public health impact, because you just basically go with, yeah, it caused one. I can't say how bad, but there was this, when this hospital was taken down for a week or the like that did impact public health. How badly? You'll find that out eventually. But that's not something we needed to look at on the STIX side. And then impacted entity counts, because anytime someone says, how many people were, messed up by your data breach, it's pretty useful to be able to say like, yeah, 2 million individuals of this type, 100 of this type, or alternatively, if you're talking about something like log4j, you can be like, yeah, someone found, a compromise. It affects 100,000 something software projects, and God only knows how many organizations. So sort of to help with that, or SolarWinds if you want to go more on the org side, I guess. Questions or comments? Okay. And finally, we have the scoring, where there's an overall 0 to 100 criticality rating, where we do have several mappings for this, as well as incident types, because ultimately people like being able to give high-level tags, so an open vocab is supplied for this. So you can just basically be like, yeah, this was a supply chain and customer that was impacted, or supplier. It was unauthorized or released. It was whatever other things you need on there. And finally, there's a list of scores, because ultimately people like being able to have arbitrary scoring systems of their own, because you have some ML thing, you have some advanced tool, it looks at 100 factors and spits out some score with maybe a narrative or maybe a dozen scores. This lets you put it in and pass it around. But, ideally, if you can use criticality, criticality is great, but just not always enough. So next slide. So attacker activities is, again, something that is an object to start actually recording what you saw the adversary doing. And there are one of two required properties on there where you must say either an activity type or reference an attack pattern. You can do both, which is wonderful, but it might, for example, be even for the activity type is, this is the incident. This is, when we thought it started. This is when we thought it ended. And that's where you can give your optional start and end times, an optional start and end sequence, a description for it, and then a list of object references. Now, what that object reference list ends up doing that's very powerful is it means you can actually give a relatively fast embedded listing of what you basically think the attack phases are for any sort of citing, observable, SCO, or indicator as you're basically pushing through this, and how these all tie together for the incident. Now, technically, a lot of this could have been done by relationships, but that gets extremely messy and verbose if you're talking about hundreds of things. So we went with an embedded approach. Any questions? Okay, next slide.
Hey, Jeff, I'm going to need to go ahead and get you to speed up, because we've got Marlon to go, and also our community corner as well. So
okay, yep. Then defender activities, where this is what you were doing, the blue side, your activity type, if there was a course of action, and you do actually have to specify time here, because ideally you know it. And if it's a projection, because sometimes you have to say when you think something will happen in the future that has not been done. And next slide. So we all generally know the so what on this, because ultimately we get incidents that actually can tie things together. Then hopefully we can have our systems start talking together better, and we make incident reporting and work on this less bad. So I think that is all I have. So.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Marlon, I hate to rush you through Interop.
No problem. We can do it. Next slide. So, shameless plug. We now have our Interop taxi calls on Tuesdays at 2:00 p.m. Eastern, as voted by the folks. Just want to emphasize that once again. I said shameless plug. On that note, let's go to the next slide. While we're talking about plugs, let's give an update on the Plug Fest efforts that have been going on. At this point, we had 2 meetings, one in December and one in January. We have a total of 12 organizations on the roster from the TC. Out of those 12 organizations, we've had our last meeting in January 13th, which we're starting looking at profiles. And from the group, we have a total of 5 STIX personas identified. So we have the malware analysis system, we have the SIM, we have the STIX the STIX producer and the STIX consumer generic personas, and then we also have the tip. All of these personas, with the exclusion of the generic ones, are all at level 2. So just for everyone's remembrance. Within Interop, we have both a level 1 and a level 2 for every persona, and the 2 being the higher of the two. And all the personas that have been identified so far by the participants have been at level 2. So that just shows that those that are participating are really trying to go all the way with their interoperability capabilities, and that is great. On the taxi persona side, we only have 2 personas in taxi at this point. This document is still in development, but we have both of those personas, which are the taxi server and the taxi client. Both of those have been selected, and they're been selected by our participants as well. So that's another good full coverage there. One thing I skipped over, out of the personas that have been selected, we have a possibility of 18 Interop use cases that we can develop off of those. Those are still to be determined by the groups, so we're not committing to that yet, but just based off of the interactions between the personas, we can do at least 18 and up. So just throwing that out there. For a date for the Plug Fest, that is still in discussion by the Plug Fest participants. We're looking at having something possibly in March, as Rob was mentioning earlier, that we may be going monthly through that point, and then also looking at June, which is when we could switch over to that quarterly base, and that's when we'll do it. Regardless of whichever month that'll happen, we're looking at something happening between the 2nd and 3rd week of the month. That way it'll roll right into the monthly meeting, or quarterly, depending on which one we go with, and then we'll be hopefully able to report something out to the group by then. We are looking at having a virtual, but there's also possibility for in-person. With that being said, for the participants of this, it will only be the PlugFest participants. So if you want to participate or join in it virtually or in person, you need to be a part of that group. It's not just something that we're just going to advertise out there. It's only for those that are working on the PlugFest, so to have a persona and have implementations that they're testing out, just to be clear with that. With that being said, let's go over to the next slide, please. On this slide, we're going over the remaining personas. Out of the 9 personas that are defined within the STIX Interop document, we have 5 of them already covered. Here are the remaining 4. If this seems to be a persona that your organization has or would be interested in testing out for interoperability, please let us know, because that rolls right into the next slide. And for here, we'll just do a little pause for a sec. If your organization is willing to participate or interested in participating, then just put your email in the chat. We don't have to pause for that too long. Just wanted to highlight that there are some personas that are not covered, and that's fine. But if you see that that's a persona that is of particular interest to your organization, then feel free to shout out by putting your email address in the chat, and we'll follow up with you. And or if there's one of the ones that were already selected, feel free to do so there. Just another plug for folks that are trying to get involved and want to be a part of the Plug Fest. Next slide, please. All right, cool. So this is just a recap of everything at this point. We're still working on the Interop. As I mentioned, those calls are at 2. We're still working through the checklist, and then through that, we'll go through the use cases. For Plug Fest, there will be a call on January 27th. This is for those that are participating in the Plug Fest, so it's not necessarily just a public TC thing. And then STIX Preferred is still something we need to get to. And that's everything for Interop. Thanks, Rob.
Marlon, wow, thank you.
All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and go into our community development corner. We've got Tomas and team to go ahead and talk about his open source knowledge graph and typedb. Tomas, I've been made you a co-host, so hopefully you should be able to go ahead and share. So basically, so we've got Tomas Sabat, who's a chief operating officer of Vatical, as well as Brett Forbes on the call here. They'll be going through a quick presentation and demo. So apologies for kind of rushing you guys towards the end.
Yeah.
But,
how much time do I have, Rob, by the way?
Let's see if you guys can go ahead and do it in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like what if we go ahead and do this? Because I think that this is cool and some people might stay on longer. What if we say goodbye? We'll catch you next month. We'll catch you on the mailing list. We have a second call at 2100 Eastern US, all the standard things now. Any questions, any additional agenda items? Going once, going twice. So now we can just go into the demo, and if folks want to stay on longer, we can, hopefully, if somebody can hold this Zoom open and like that. Does that work?
Yeah. I appreciate that, Trey. Thank you. And and thank you to you, Trey and Jane, and the entire committee for inviting us to present here our work here. I'm joined by one of our community members, Brett Forbes. Brett, maybe you just want to say hi so people can see your existence.
Hello from Australia.
So thank you, Brett. It's very late in Australia, so I appreciate joining in this hour. Brett is one of our community members, one of our most active, and almost from the beginning of the company, he's been supporting the work, and is an expert modeler when it comes to working with typedb, and he's very much involved and leading this open source project that I have the pleasure of introducing you today. Now, I just a little bit of a context. So my name's Thomas. I work as one of the founders and the chief operating officer at Vatical. We built typedb, which is a general purpose database software, a strongly typed database. But I want to talk specifically about this open source project that we just started. And I do want to say this is just launched. It's still in development. So it's still very, very raw. So we invite criticisms. We invite people to use it, to break it, to criticize us. This is the repo. You can look at it whenever you want. Still very new. But basically, what we've done is we've implemented the STIX specification as much as we can to typedb, and then use the MITRE STIX dataset in order to provide an example data set to play around with. So there's a connector, there's a migrator to load the MITRE STIX, the MITRE attack STIX data set, and to demonstrate what it actually gives you. I just want to do a quick demo of what that actually provides. So like I said, so typedb is a database. So I've got right now a database running on my computer. And this is what we call as typedb Studio, which is effectively a visualization software to visualize your data. And I've migrated the MITRE attack data set and into a STIX data schema that we built in typedb, and I'll say more on that in a second. The query that we asked is what you see at the top here. So we're specifically looking for a course of action that's an entity type that has a name of restrict file and directory permissions. We're also looking for an entity of type intrusion set that has name black tech. And then we're looking for a relation between black tech and this course of action. And that relation is of type mitigation. Now the result is visualized below. So we see that there is apparently a mitigation between this course of action that seems to be mitigating this intrusion set. But if we look deeper, we see that this is actually an inferred mitigation. And this is one of the key reasons why you may be interested in looking at typedb, is because of these insights that we can get. So because it's an inferred relation, this data doesn't actually exist in the database. And what that means is basically is that it's an inference. Now, because it's an inference, we can get an explanation why that inference is made. Because the type of inferencing that typedb does is fully deterministic. And so when I just double clicked on it, it gave us the first layer of explanation for that particular relation, that's inferred mitigation. And so that explanation tells us that apparently this course of action is mitigating not this intrusion set, but actually this attack pattern, this indicator blocking. And it's that attack pattern that's being used by this intrusion set. Now, this relation here, this usage relation, is persisted. So this actually is in the MITRE data set. But this relation right here, this mitigating, sorry, the other way around. This mitigation relation is in the actual MITRE data set. But this use relation is not, because this is, again, another inference that is made by typedb, because the actual data set, the actual persisted data, shows us that actually that this intrusion set is used by this malware called WaterBear. And that WaterBear is then used by this attack pattern indicator, this indicator blocking attack pattern, which is being mitigated by this course of action. So the point of this very short and hopefully succinct demonstration is to say when you're looking for insights, and specifically when we have a lot of transitive relations, to have some sort of high-level abstraction, some sort of summary that allows us to ask a high-level question. If you're a cyber analyst or whatever, getting the reason to use typedb in this case is because we get these inferred concepts. Now, I've got a couple of slides to go through that are actually from a webinar that we're planning to do in the first week of February if you're keen to learn more. So definitely I'm not going to go through all the slides because it's a bit too much. But we are going to also have monthly committee calls, and do feel free to reach out to Brett and to me too if you're interested to participate. So the typedb data, and I'm assuming you can all see a slide deck. If you can't, please let me know. And so currently what we have is we have the database that we're using with typedb. The data model itself is based on STIX right now. And as an initial data set that we use is the MITRE attack data set. Now, the reason why we're using typedb, and especially why we have in our community, and everything that I'm showing is open source, why we have a lot of users in our open source community using typedb for CTI data is really down to two main reasons. The first one is the expressivity of the language. Now, there's a lot to say there, and Brett can really dive into detail if you're keen to learn more. But it all comes down to having a very easy representations of very, very complex concepts. And another really important point is the fact that in typedb, attributes are unique. So there's, if you have a hash, if you have an SHA-256 value that only exists once in the database. So if you're trying to link between different values, that's actually very hard to do if you're using a traditional graph database. And the second part is that of the logical inference, and that's what I was trying to demo just now, where we can have transitive relations, we can create atomic rules, we can and ultimately generate new insights. So basically what we did is that we went through the STIX specification, and we basically created a typedb model out of it. Now, typedb implements its own schema language, and hopefully that you'll see is that the language is very, very simple to use to represent really the complexity that exists in STIX. And STIX, what the committee and the group has done is an extraordinary job. We've studied the document extensively the past 6 months, and it's been a pleasure really to implement this in typedb because it fits so well to the model in typedb. And one of those reasons is because of the type hierarchies that we can create. So for example, here we're creating, on the right, this is the schema language. We're defining a domain object, a STIX domain object. And then below, we're defining an intrusion set, which is a subtype of a STIX domain object. So in this case, the subtype inherits all the properties that its parent has, in this case, the STIX domain object, and so forth. And we can go in a future webinar, we can go into more detail to the whole schema, but basically, when you're trying to create this in typedb, you end up with the model as you see it in STIX, with the STIX core objects, the meta objects, the domain objects, et cetera, But hopefully that you'll see is that to actually implement this in code is very straightforward, because to create a type hierarchy in typedb, on the schema side, we just use these keywords such as sub, in this case, to denote that something is an entity. If we want to create a subtype of that, we again use the keyword sub. We want to create more subtypes, the TLP markings, the different TLP markets, and so forth. And so to create the actual implementation in the code is very straightforward, as opposed to using something like a graph database or just in JSON. Because when you look deeper at the JSON, you see things like, for example, a relationship object that also has embedded relations in them. And so this is again why STIX is so beautifully placed to work with typedb, because the ability to create nested relations, so have a relation refer to another relation, you can't do with any other existing database. Because in this case, we can actually create an indication relation between an indicator and a threat actor, where we can create a relation that refers to another relation. And I won't go through the code how that looks like, but the usefulness of using typedb to represent STIX is that we can natively, as first-class citizens, represent things like nested relations, but also hyper relations, type hierarchies, as I mentioned before, and of course the rules that allow us to represent the inferences that we showed in the demo. So this is effectively the query that I showed in typedb Studio, where if we explore that inferred relation right there, that explanation is because in the schema, we represent a rule that looks like this, and that rule is effectively a pattern. And if that pattern is correct, given the schema, given the data that exists in the database at the time of when you're running the query, then the inference will be made. And that's therefore the system will always be deterministic. And then the second level inference that we showed before, which is that inference for this usage relation, and then where this is the explanation where the intrusion set is connected to the malware, which is connected to the attack pattern. That, for example, is based on a very straightforward use or transitive use relationship. So I won't go into detail into all these different things because and I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit fast over this. Usually we spend a bit more time to go into detail about this, but I hope at least this raises your curiosity as to what we're doing with the project. And so again, to summarize, the reason why we're using typedb for CTI, and also what we've learned from all the different CTI users that actually all are also using STIX and typedb, is because of the expressivity in the language and the logical inference. So I think I'll leave it at that. Perhaps, Brett, do you have anything else to add? Something perhaps that we want to share that I missed?
We really look forward to, we think typedb is a game changer compared to a property graph for STIX, for threat analysts. And we've got some quite extensive community plans and some good people working with us. And we'd love to have anyone who wants to come. Please look at the links we've dropped in the chat. We'd love to have you involved or just show you through it. Let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
No, I was just going to thank you for having us.
Well, I hope that this was a good use of all of your time. I had an in-depth call with Thomas earlier this week where we also went through all of the sort of open source licensing questions, and because this community development corner is never intended to be, and it must never be, a platform for a vendor pitch, right? It's one thing if IBM or Eclectic IQ or MISP want to come on here and talk about lessons learned from implementing the standards in the product. If they want to talk about interoperability challenges that they faced and how they overcame them in a commercial setting, that's one thing. That's perfectly fine in my view for a community development corner. But I did the vetting. Like, I've thrown vendors off stage at conferences for doing thinly veiled pitches, and I brought this. I emphasize this on the list because I've also worked with, a lot of tips, commercial and open source over the years, and it's as a developer, the headaches of using like a Postgres with JSON, or using a GraphDB, or using Mongo, or what have you. There hasn't been a really great solution that I've seen. And since I was satisfied that typedb and this work would be something that could be used either in an open source or commercial application, and that it seems highly relevant. Also, Thomas mentioned to me that basically most of this he hacked together over his Christmas break, which, if that's true, suggests I'm going to take a hard look at typedb for some other applications, maybe. But I just wanted to make sure, and thanks all for holding on here. I hope this was a valuable